The ancient Egyptians are certainly one of the most mysterious civilizations of all time. Not only did they complete massive monuments, but also had a polytheistic religion which we're about to explore. From the crocodile-human hybrid of Sebek to the god of mummification in the underworld, here are 10 most powerful ancient Egyptian gods. Number 10. Anubis. Anubis was the god of the underworld and the afterlife, and this ancient Egyptian deity often appeared on some of the oldest Egyptian structures. His role as a god slowly evolved, and he was more associated with the embalming process and funeral rites. Preserving the body was key for the ancient Egyptians, so for high-profile pharaohs and nobles, mummification was necessary. He's portrayed as a jackal, but also has been seen as a human-jackal hybrid in some cases, but with black fur. This is possibly because jackals were often seen as scavenging on dead animals at this time in Egypt. He played a key role in the weighing of the heart ceremony in the Book of the Dead, which would determine if someone was acceptable for entering the afterlife. If the heart or soul was heavier than the feather of truth, it would be devoured by a horrifying creature known as the Emmet. To top it off, the person would then not be able to enter the afterlife. This thing had a head of a crocodile, the upper body of a lion, and the back end of a hippo. Sometimes priests would wear Anubis masks during mummification like we see here. Number 9. Thoth. Scribes held a fair amount of power in ancient Egypt and were the ones who recorded history on papyrus scrolls that we see today. Thoth was the god of scribes, therefore the god of knowledge. He's credited for the invention of writing, the scribe of the underworld, and also is basically the all-wise knowing god who basically knows everything. He takes the form of an ibis, which is a sacred bird in ancient Egypt. Some tales tell that he was created from the lips of Ra and doesn't have a mother, while others believe that he basically created himself from some magical cosmic egg that fell from the sky. Due to this, he's also associated with magic and chaos. However, there are quite a few different legends of his creation. When recording written languages, Thoth was considered to be the one who gave mankind this crucial ability. He kept track of everything that happened among the gods by writing it down, and he could even predict the future. Number 8. Horus. Thoth pales in comparison to other bird-like gods of ancient Egypt, and one that was a little bit more powerful was indeed Horus. This is the god of the sky and was the son of Osiris and Isis, which we might get to later on. This image shows Isis and Osiris on the right, who all play significant roles in Egyptian mythology. He takes very many different forms and can be depicted just as a falcon or a falcon-human hybrid as well. Horus is the elder son of this immortal couple, and he's basically like a superhero who defeats evil. This is one of the earliest Egyptian deities that we know of, and was worshipped all the way up until the Greeks arrived. The memory of Horus lives on in the Temple of Horus in Edfu, which contains unbelievable artwork. His eye is a well-known symbol, which means protection, royal power, and good health. His right eye was associated with the sun, and his left eye was the moon. In Egyptian mythology, Horus defeats his evil uncle known as Seth in an epic raging battle. This also made him the god of war and hunting. Number 7. Sebek. The Nile River can be home to some dangerous animals such as hippos, snakes, and oh yeah, crocodiles. Everyone meet your reptilian Egyptian leader known as Sobek. He's often associated with pharaonic power, fertility, military strength, and has magical powers to protect Egypt from evil. This deity gained the most power during the Middle Kingdom under the rule of Amenemhat III. It was at this time where his head sort of began to fuse with the falcon head of Ra, but he lives up to his fierce reputation of being a crocodile and all. It's said that he does love to rob, doesn't mind eating people, and can be quite large and violent. However, he's said to have somewhat of a soft side to him, and he helped out Isis after the death of her husband Osiris. Due to his godlike status, it made crocodiles of the Nile sacred, and they were even mummified in many cases. Number 6. Isis. Isis was described as a beautiful yet mystical woman who was married to the god Osiris, who was a whole nother god of the underworld. She's often portrayed with wings, eyeliner, and is the most powerful Egyptian goddess out there. She was worshipped as the ideal woman, mother, and wife. We mentioned her earlier how she was the mother of Horus, but she had given birth to 2 other gods as well, Nut, the goddess of the sky, and Geb, the goddess of the earth. To put this in perspective, she was kinda like the Virgin Mary, but in Egyptian mythology. During the Greco-Roman period, her cult was still followed, and they believed that when the Nile flooded, it was from the tears of Isis. As the story goes, Osiris's body was cut into many different pieces by his brother Set and left in many different parts of the world. Set was jealous that his brother had married such a beautiful woman and was set on destroying him. Isis planned on finding all the pieces out there and sewing them back together to bring her husband back to life. Osiris would then come back to be the ruler of the underworld. Bastet. Bastet was one of the early Egyptian gods to arrive and became the sun goddess of warfare in Lower Egypt, or the northern Nile Delta. She's portrayed as a human-cat hybrid, but earlier depictions just show her as a cat, normally black. She can be depicted as a fierce lioness warrior or just as a simple house cat. Many are still intrigued where the origins of the domesticated cats came from, and judging by the statues, it appears to be in Egypt. There's no other place in the world at this time that depicts domesticated cats such as this, which would lead you to believe that they were unique to Egypt for quite a while. In temples dedicated to Bastet, they found over 300,000 mummified cats. Where did all these freaking cats come from? This is one of the reasons why cats were treated pretty nicely back in the times of ancient Egypt. Many would also greatly appreciate their ability to catch mice and other vermits. The city of Bostadt was dedicated in her honor, and huge, massive festivals would take place with plenty of beer and food. Some 700,000 visitors would attend this event, and many would flock during this feast of drunkenness. Number 4. Set. Set is the god of all things evil. This includes things such as storms, chaos, violence, invading armies, and the desert. He was the father of Anubis, and Set plays a prominent role in Egyptian mythology, as you probably noticed already. But he's not always portrayed as evil. Set was employed by Ra to repel a giant serpent creature known as Apep that stretched over 50 feet long. Following his allegiance was, however, a little bit more dark, you could say, and Greeks would eventually associate him with Typhon, which was an evil, terrifying giant creature. Since Set was the god of foreigners, he would often be associated with oppressing rulers such as the Assyrians and the Persians. Set isn't really portrayed as any specific animal or character, although a lot of the time you can see him with the face of an anteater. The most notable scene of this god in mythology was certainly the battle between him and Horus. This was to see who would be the next king of Egypt after Osiris was gone. Set spotted Horus along the marshes of the Nile, and flames were erupting into the sky during an epic battle. Others believe that the battles between Horus and Set were meant to represent civil wars in Egypt between the upper and lower parts. Number 3. Ra. Ra was certainly one of the most powerful Egyptian gods, and it's said that he created the world, the sky, the earth, and the underworld. He's most commonly referred to as the sun god, and was the father of the god of wind and the goddess of rain. It was also normally Ra's job to defeat evil monsters lurking around in the afterlife. To complete this task, he would usually employ other gods such as Bastet and Sett, as we mentioned earlier. Ra had the ability to create things with his blood and tears. In some cases, he managed to merge with other gods like Horus, and an all-powerful god named Amun-Ra was even worshipped in places like Nubia and Greece. The temple of Amun-Ra, located in Karnak, is simply remarkable, and it's one of the biggest architectural achievements in ancient Egypt. Even in modern times, it still houses the largest single religious room ever constructed, known as the hypostyle hall. He's basically the king of all gods, similar to a role Zeus played in ancient Greece. Number 2. Osiris. So after Osiris was defeated by his conniving brother Seth, he was brought back to life, but basically like a zombie Frankenstein-like creature at this point. This is kind of why his skin is portrayed as green, because his flesh was basically rotting. He's partially mummified as well, and if you look into the whole story with Isis, Set, and the whole inbred family, it's pretty gross, and probably not YouTube friendly. Anyways, after Anubis, Osiris began to gain fame as the god of the underworld. He also became the judge of whether or not you could pass through the pearly gates and into the afterlife. He kind of absorbed Anubis' role as the leader of the underworld, but they often worked together. He was also the god of farming and agriculture, which may seem a tad bizarre considering he's no longer alive. But it all plays into the circle of life. Osiris is displayed quite often in Egyptian temples, and he makes up a prominent role at Queen Hatshepsut's mortuary temple outside the city of Luxor. She believed that dedicated wonderful statues to this god would help her find a path into the afterlife. And number 1. The Pharaohs. The Pharaohs were like gods on earth and had full control of Egypt. Massive monuments were built in their honor, and in some cases, they had hundreds of wives in order to spread their bloodline as much as possible, and it actually worked. Ramses the Great was said to have as many as 100 children, and there's actually a very good chance you have some genetics from an Egyptian pharaoh. A Swiss genetics company even claims that 70% of British men are somewhat related to King Tut. Egyptian pharaohs would often associate themselves with an Egyptian god, and they believed that they were divinely chosen to rule the land. The pharaoh, if powerful enough, would often engage in military conflict as well, and it was his responsibility to protect Egypt as best as possible. The great godlike pharaohs were responsible for gathering troops against devastating enemy armies. Their final resting places would also be fit for a god. The tombs of the pharaohs would often contain lavish golden coffins and many artifacts to bring with them to the afterlife, to continue their rule as gods.